Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Occupy Wall Street is winning. Hundreds of thousands of bankers and brokers are being laid off. That's right. Get rid of the banksters. That's what we're aiming for. Stacy Herbert, tell us more.
Well, Max, here's a headline from the Reformed Broker. Rough times for the brokerage industry. Bankers are being laid off.
That's right. Well, those are like the bomb makers, aren't they? So we got to get rid of them.
Brokers are being laid off.
Yeah, those are the financiers of the bomb makers, so we got to get rid of those terrorists.
Traders are being laid off.
Yeah, the traders, they create the fuses for the bombs that are sold by the bankers and brokers. Lay them off. They're terrorists.
Support staff are being laid off.
Collateral damage.
Product people are being laid off.
Those are marketing people. They try to sell the idea that the brokers and bankers and the fuse makers are selling in worthwhile products to blow up economies. Got to get rid of them. They're terrorists.
Wealth management people are being laid off.
Those are the people that try to convince the wealthy that they should take massive losses in their account to finance the bankers and brokers and candlestick makers and fuse makers and marketing people to build the bombs that blow everybody up.
And finally, analysts are being laid off.
Analysts provide the neo-economic liberal concatenations of the academic model, like a Nouriel Roubini, to prove that blowing people up for economic glory makes some kind of academic sense. He's got to go. All them guys got to go. They're terrorists.
Well, Max, the headlines on this continue. Wall Street unoccupied with 200,000 job cuts. To those people, I say, here's a McDonald's application. Go get a job, you peasants.
Suck it up! Yes, Charlie Munger would say. Suck it up!
Well, the article starts off introducing John Brady, the co-head of MF Global Incorporated's Chicago office. He's looking to join a firm now, as he's lost his job, that believes integrity and honesty are the single most important ingredients to success.
Yeah, there's always, in a foxhole, people discover God. After this guy has been committing massive fraud knowingly, willingly, and sucking on the teat of the massive global fraud, suddenly he wants to be a good boy and work for an ethical company. I say, to the gallows to you, my friend!
But the other point, you've made this before, is that the system is fraud. So if he's looking for one with integrity and honesty, those two just don't go together. That's like saying, I want an honest mafia don. I don't want to work for one of these thugs that kill people and put cement boots on them and throw them into the Hudson.
Exactly. He should get a job as a florist or a dog walker, something like that, where his ability to cause trouble is minimized.
Well, there are some more unemployed bankers and those who service the bankers, Max. Foreclosure firm Stephen J. Baum to close down. Now, the funny thing about this is, of course, they were fired because of those images, those photos from Halloween where they dressed up as the clients that they illegally foreclosed upon. And they thought it was so hysterical. But because Freddie Mac, the major underwriter of half of the mortgages in the U.S., the government-sponsored entity that the taxpayer now completely owns, well, they stopped allowing anybody to use them. So they had to go out of business. But the guy who heads Stephen J. Baum firm, he wrote a letter to Joe Nocera from the New York Times, who is the first one to publish those photos. And he said, Mr. Nocera, you have destroyed everything and everyone related to Stephen J. Baum. It took 40 years to build this firm and 3 weeks to tear it down.
I don't know why it took so long to tear this sucker down. Because they've been involved in a massive fraud for probably 39 of those 40 years. This guy needs to get on the bread line into the soup kitchen and beg for a crust of bread on his way to the gallows.
But you could apply his own charges against Mr. Nocera to the whole U.S. economy, the U.S. empire. It took 40, 50, 60 years to build that up, and a few months for the bankers to take it down. Less than a few months, one day, really, in 2008.
Well, it's a good point. You know, the U.S. economy is built on the back of massive debt expansion, and then once it becomes clear that the debt can't be serviced, it evaporates like a hologram in the wind. And that's exactly what we're seeing now, because people understand that the U.S. economy, Wall Street, it's just one big Enron. And once confidence evaporates, so does all the equity. And it's good night, Marie.
Now, it was the images of them at Stephen J. Baum dressed as the homeless that they had made homeless. that really resulted in the firm going out of business. Now I want to turn to this image here that I saw on the OccupyWallStreetNews.org, and it's an image of some cyborgs or policemen, I can't tell, but they're protecting J.P. Morgan Chase. And with that in mind, I want to look at these next headlines, most of them involving J.P. Morgan Chase. MF Global, the mess that keeps getting messier. So this is an article on CNN Money from Leah McGrath Goodman, a friend of the show. And apparently big institutional investors are getting a taste of what many frustrated taxpayers experienced during the financial crisis, being on the hook for losses of a major financial firm against their wishes. Now, remember, the trustees have now announced that, in fact, there's a $1.2 billion black hole of missing client funds, which coincidentally happens to be the exact same amount of MF Global funds at J.P. Morgan, which J.P. Morgan is not releasing to the trustees or the clients of MF Global. So with that, she says, although MF Global owes J.P. Morgan $1.2 billion as an unsecured creditor, clients of MF Global whose funds are still missing should not have to beg J.P. Morgan for relief. We're simply asserting that if MF Global commingled funds from customer accounts or cannot properly account for them, J.P. Morgan can't lay claim to those funds as if they were their own, says one investor in MF Global.
Look, J.P. Morgan's balance sheet is severely impaired, and a lot of smart money is short J.P. Morgan. You know, my guess is that Jim Rogers, who said he is short a big money bank, but he didn't give the name. I'll just guess that it's J.P. Morgan. He can comment on that if he wishes. But I think the smart money is massively short J.P. Morgan stock, because this stock, if you mark to market anything and everything, is worth less than zero.
But it's a theme here I'm really focused on, Max, is that we have been focusing on is that the millionaires, the 100 millionaires, if you make, you know, one of these hedge fund guys think, oh, I make 200 million a year, I'm like the top 1.01%, I'm one of these guys, JP Morgan will take care of me. Well, they're getting wiped out. Their funds are being stolen now because all the peasants have nothing. They have nothing but debt, and they're already on J.P. Morgan's gulag farm.
All right, exactly. The bar for fraud and malfeasance is being raised all the time. Now it's including those folks, you know, who are aspiring to the Fortune 400 list. Next year it'll be the folks on the Fortune 400 list.
And of course, Max, a lot of the hedge fund managers and bankers are throwing job applications at the Occupy Wall Street protesters. So another interesting quote from this article is that Leah McGrath Goodman spoke to a hedge fund manager who goes unnamed. He's anonymous. What's different about this case, she asks? Well, according to this one hedge fund executive, summed it up best. What is scary about MF Global is that there is no political will in this country to look out for people. Let this be a lesson that if someone tries to steal from you, there is no one who is going to save you. I mean, it is literally the most frightening thing that could happen in finance.
Duh. I mean, it's kind of funny when all these hedge fund people, Greenwich, Connecticut sorts, finally wake up to the economy as it actually exists for tens of millions and 100 million people in America now have either one foot in or about to enter the poverty zone. And so now this hits the Greenwich, Connecticut living, the Paul Tudor Jones types out there, hedge fund managers who suddenly realize that they're supporting a massively corrupt system, and the tears are just bolting out of their eyeballs. They can't be, oh, woe is me, oh, boo-hoo. Well, they said nothing when the people started getting their wealth confiscated. You know, the people on with low-paying jobs, the people who were marginalized by society, by the fraud committed by Wall Street. They said nothing. Now they're coming for you. And my advice is to STFU.
Here's J.P. Morgan seizing the funds from the guys who thought they were in the 1% and that protected them, when it's the 0.00001% that you'll see actually at the end of the day will get everything. And J.P. Morgan, as you know, administers the food stamp program in America. So I want to turn to this story here to look at how much fraud J.P. Morgan has committed that has come to light over the last few years, and not once have they had to admit to guilt, and always they paid a fraction of their ill-gotten gains as a fine. Woman given 3-year prison term for a lie. So a federal judge has sentenced a woman to 3 years in federal prison for lying on her food stamp application. This is in Mississippi, and apparently, if you've ever been charged with a crime involving drugs, you're never allowed to collect any benefits. So she applied for food stamps, and she lied, saying she had never been charged with crimes involving drugs. But she had 2 boys to feed, 2 children. So she received $4,367 over the few years in food stamps. When she was caught, she paid it back, and still, this judge bypassed sentencing guidelines that suggested she receive 2 to 8 months in prison and would have made her eligible for probation just immediately, so she would have never gone to jail. But instead, the judge sentenced her under a federal statute that carries a maximum 5 years sentence. He said, quote, "The defendant's criminal record is simply abominable. She has been the beneficiary of government generosity and state court."
Right, so the judge is pointing to this woman as a cheater of a food stamp program that J.P. Morgan administers. And while administering it, they've committed already on the books 3 massive episodes of multi-hundred-million-dollar fraud.
I think billion.
Of which they've paid only pennies on the dollar without having to admit that they're guilty. Now, you wonder why there's an Occupy movement. You wonder why the people are staging an uprising. You wonder why Jamie Dimon doesn't feel safe when he goes home at night. You wonder why he looks over his shoulder, seeing when the people will come for him.
Just to see where this is heading, so all of these bankers, the J.P. Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, the Bank of America, the Citigroups, they've benefited from huge amounts of federal taxpayer dollars. They've been bailed out by all the taxpayers over and over again. Here's, I think, something you could look for them to do now, because they use the financial emergency to get all these TARP funds, these bailout funds. Well, former AIG CEO sues, claiming taxpayers need to pony up $25 billion. Yes, remember the taxpayers given AIG over $70 billion when their stock price was down at almost zero. Now, Hank Greenberg, on Monday last week, filed a $25 billion lawsuit against the U.S., claiming that the government takeover of the insurer was unconstitutional, claiming that he was not given just compensation.
Well, look, I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Because at the crisis stage, it was deemed that we couldn't possibly put any of these guys in jail. We need to look forward. Remember, this is Barack Obama. He's saying we got to go forward. Well, of course, the risk is that these criminals will just come back to the trough again and ask for more money, as this guy Hank Greenberg is doing.
And remember, Max, last week we covered the story of the Chinese thief who broke into a woman's house and then yelled at her for not giving him enough money, that she was not working hard enough to have something worth stealing. And this is what these guys who ripped us off the first go-round, now they're coming back saying, we want more. You didn't pay us enough for our crimes.
Hank Greenberg, what a putz. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away, much more coming your way, so stay right there.
Welcome to the future.
More and more mouths to feed, but where will the food come from? Can science provide the answers? The future of food under the microscope.
We've got the future covered.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and speak with Danny Schechter, the news dissector. Danny, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Hey, pleasure, Max. Happy Thanksgiving.
Danny Schechter, you made a film and a book called Plunder, The Crime of Our Time. Everything you discussed is coming true. Recently, Judge Rakoff, for example, said the SEC settlements with Bank of America and Citigroup were an abomination, but that he, as a federal judge, had no authority to do anything about it. Your thoughts?
Well, this is the whole problem. We still haven't had an effective investigation on any level of fraud on Wall Street. There's been a couple of prosecutions, mostly of minor players. Another Madoff trader has now been basically convicted and being sentenced to 40 years. But basically, the people in the big banks who engaged in the subprime lending scandals and the leveraging and all of this have been able to create settlements and have their companies pay off the government in lieu of trials that would send CEOs to jail. And this is one of the blatant problems that inspire movements like Occupy Wall Street and anger Americans across the spectrum who are just furious at this abomination of justice, to use the judge's word. Now there's the whole question of MF Global, the company that fell apart under the leadership of former New Jersey governor and Goldman Sachs chief, John Corzine. Apparently it said $600 million was missing. Now they're saying $1.2 billion is missing. Apparently, in their last days, they took customer money, which they're not allowed to do, to help pay off some of the debts that they had to European banks and the like. And this is being investigated by the FBI right now. There's going to be a congressional probe of it. But it's become a partisan matter, in part because Corzine, of course, was a Democratic governor. So the Republicans are up in arms about this one. But as by and large are supporting Wall Street. And in fact, the Republican Party executives have denounced Occupy Wall Street, saying it's the wrong target. You know, you should focus on the Congress, i.e. focus on Democrats. So it's around and around we go. And no real breakthroughs seem to be in sight. But this movement is still picking up steam. According to media monitors last week, Occupy Wall Street had its most media ever, largely because of the police crackdown, which now in the minds of many has been orchestrated by support from the government. Particularly the Department of Homeland Security has been meeting with local cities. They've been providing all sorts of, quote, non-lethal policing tools, and the consequence is there have been more arrests, like the incident that outraged the world at the University of California in Davis, where young people who were sitting down nonviolently were pepper sprayed. Now the police that did it have been put on leave, but these kinds of outrages continue, and they continue basically to grow the movement by getting more sympathy for the activists.
Of course, Danny Schechter, during the 1960s, the anti-war movement, we had the Kent State moment when students at Kent State were gunned down. This galvanized the anti-war movement and pushed the momentum toward the success of that movement. Have we had the Kent State moment yet with the Occupy movement? The pepper spraying? Go ahead.
Today there was a report of the first fatality in Seattle, where a woman had a miscarriage after being hit by the police, lost her child. You know, a situation of a growing confrontation and growing violence by the police. And, you know, the question is, to what degree is the Obama administration directly implicated in all of this? The president himself was challenged in New Hampshire at a political appearance yesterday. He was what they call mic checked. This is the way in which the movement, you know, challenges him by one person saying mic check, another saying mic check, and then they repeat their questions. And they did this at a political meeting in New Hampshire. So this is clearly not a movement that's partisan, but a movement for justice, economic justice.
When I go back to 2008 and Obama took over the presidency, his idea was that we can't look back, we can't prosecute the banksters, we have to look forward. And John Corzine, who was mentioned as a possible Treasury Secretary at the time, and up until even a few months ago by Vice President of the United States as a possible Treasury Secretary nomination, Joe Biden, was there a big mistake there in not prosecuting the banksters and letting them, because they want to come back and steal more? Hank Greenberg now, he wasn't prosecuted or thrown in jail for his lying, cheating, and stealing. Now he wants to come back and sue the government for billions more.
Yeah, I mean, Max, I think this has been a big mistake because it feeds the perception and the real perception, the actual reality of a lack of economic justice, that somebody who gets arrested for stealing a Coca-Cola from a grocery store is prosecuted. Somebody who actually engaged in the looting of their own companies and their own banks through giant bonus schemes and compensation and the like, these people are not even considered subjects of criminal investigations. So, and we have a precedent in this country back at the S&L crisis where over 1,000, I think 1,700 banksters went to jail. There were criminal referrals that were put forward by regulators. In this case, there have been virtually none. And this is something that I think has kept the government's credibility very low in the eyes of most people who've been following this.
Recently, Freddie Mac cut off support for Stephen J. Baum, one of the biggest mortgage brokers in the industry. As a result, they've had to declare bankruptcy and go out of business, and now all the employees are on the street. These are the same people who dressed up like the homeless people they made homeless a year before at a Halloween party. And now this Baum character wants sympathy. He says, "Oh, woe is me. Why are you attacking me?" Is that justified, or is he just crying big, fat alligator tears?
I mean, he's alleged to have run what's called a foreclosure mill. You know, he was basically serving the banks and getting people out of their homes that the banks claim they owned. In some cases, the banks didn't even own these homes, but they foreclosed anyway. And judges who are just rubber stamping these applications for foreclosure because they're political appointees just, signed these foreclosure orders, and people were thrown out of their homes. But he was so, egregious in the way he did it. And it was so outrageous when this party, came to light of mocking the people he was throwing out, that the government really cracked down on him. In other words, you have to be really outrageously bad to get the attention, of the prosecutors and the regulators. But, the whole housing bubble basically is now a housing muddle. There's no real breakthrough there. The industry is, basically in the toilet, and we have a situation where there are many people who engaged in direct, outright, provable fraud that have not been prosecuted.
Danny Schechter, let me ask you, there's now 200,000 being laid off on Wall Street, so the Occupy movement is very successful in getting these banksters out of the front line. Now, do you think that they're going to join the Occupy movement at this stage, understanding that their predicament, or are they still in denial?
Well, let's understand something. Wall Street has occupied America for a long, long time. This movement is challenging that occupation with another occupation, which is under attack by the New York City police and a realty company named Brookfield Properties, whose board the mayor's girlfriend sits, as well as, I'm told, Joe Biden's son is an attorney for this company. So, the fact that Wall Street is doing a better job of actually collapsing than the Occupy movement is doing and forcing them to collapse is interesting in itself. It's their own, karma, basically, that's gotten them. Their practices have been, not just questionably legal, but, ineffective, and have led to a whole financial collapse. So, the Occupy movement isn't gloating about this. They're still looking for regulators to try to do their job and prosecutors to do their job. They're still pursuing justice to try to get money, big money, out of politics. And this movement, I believe, is really inspiring the whole world. I mean, there have been 1,000 cities have had protests in support of Occupy Wall Street and the objectives, even though they haven't even spelled them out. People get it, Occupy Wall Street, it's about time, is the reaction of a lot of people in New York. And so the popularity of the movement has grown, even though the movement is under attack and is not even allowed, to occupy a half an acre of a park in New York City.
Danny Schechter, the Anonymous group, the hacktivist online group Anonymous, recently said or suggested that they were going to start their own hedge fund, and as the banking industry implodes, they would be selling shares short and profiting from the collapse as we see risk returning to the operations of these banks that, for all intents and purposes, have been operating with zero risk for the past 10 to 15 years, thanks to derivatives and other hedging strategies. Do you think this is a good idea for hacktivist groups like Anonymous to start their own hedge fund and fight fire with fire? What do you think?
I think there's a lot of creative tactics. Some have been successful, some have failed, some have actually succeeded despite failure. In other words, 700 people get arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. That's a failure. They didn't get across the bridge, but it's a success because it led, to a doubling of their support in New York City because of the police brutality and abuse, which was just so clear. So, will Anonymous be successful as hedge fund people? I don't know. The hedge funds, some of them have been very successful, but many haven't. I think there's a lot of different imaginative tactics being adopted. I mean, Anonymous is not really part of this movement. They're supporting it. But the movement itself is trying to codify its demands and political program. The basic thrust of it seems, Max, to occupy the mainstream. They want to not just reach people who agree with them. They want to reach out to all kinds of people, unemployed workers, victims of student debt, where students can't afford to stay in school, people who are being foreclosed upon and the like. And there are millions of people in that situation. I mean, there are a lot of studies that are showing that 45% of the people can't afford to pay their bills. I mean, we're in a bad situation that seems to be getting worse. And at least this movement is articulating the frustrations and the feelings of people who we haven't heard from before. Remember, up until 6 months ago, the whole debate in America, 3 months ago, was all about deficits. Cut, 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 cut. In Europe, austerity was the religious mantra of the day. Now, economic justice as an issue is being put on the agenda thanks to Occupy Wall Street. You got to give them credit for that.
So, Danny Schechter, how can people reach you and catch up with what you're up to?
You can find out more about my book about financial crime and my film Plunder at plunderthecrimeofourtime.com, plunderthecrimeofourtime.com, and I can be reached at dissector@mediachannel.org. Thanks, Max.
All right, fantastic. Danny Schechter for being on the Keiser Report. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Danny Schechter, the news dissector. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. You can follow us at Keiser Report on both Twitter and Facebook. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.